In many countries, a significant number of rape cases are never reported to the authorities. Fear, shame, and the risk of being doubted or mocked lead many victims to stay silent. Even though the laws in each country provide different levels of punishment, ranging from light to extremely severe, depending on the nature of the crime, many offenders still find ways to evade responsibility and never face justice. In the Philippines, one of the earliest sexual assault cases to cause a major media shock was the case of Maggie de la Riva in 1967. Maggie de la Riva, a well-known actress, was abducted right outside her home in New Manila, Quezon City, in the early hours of June 26, 1967. She was overpowered by 4 men, all from wealthy and influential families, and taken to a hotel where she was sexually assaulted. This case became one of the most well-known criminal cases in Philippine history, not only because of the brazen nature of the crime, but also because the perpetrators appeared to act with open disregard for the law. Above all, however, the case is remembered for Maggie de la Riva's courage. Instead of staying silent, she came forward and pursued the case to the end, forcing the men who harmed her to face justice. Maggie de la Riva was born on September 3, 1942, in Manila, the daughter of Pilar Torrente and Juan de la Riva. She completed her elementary and high school education at Miriam College, then finished secretarial training at St. Teresa's College in 1960. Before entering the film industry, Maggie had been a ballet dancer. From the early 1960s onward, she began appearing more and more in the Philippine entertainment scene. In 1963, Maggie was selected as one of the 5 finalists in the Miss Caltex beauty pageant. That same year, she represented traditional Philippine dress for the Philippine Fashion Association under the sponsorship of Millie's Gowns. In 1964, she was again chosen, this time as the face of the Respect the Centavo campaign. Maggie's artistic career did not stop at film. Before she truly became known on the big screen, she had already joined beauty contests, worked as a model, performed as a singer at some of Manila's top nightclubs, and even had her own show. Maggie made her first screen appearance alongside Joseph Estrada in the film Istambe, and it was Estrada who opened the door for her to go further in the film industry. In a short period of time, Maggie de la Riva became a highly promising young actress. Her career advanced quickly. Even though she had not yet fully established herself as a top star, she had already appeared in nearly 40 films. She was also known as a singer and a familiar guest performer at major entertainment venues in Manila. In other words, Maggie was everywhere. Her name was clearly on the rise. But behind that image was another kind of pressure. After her father died, Maggie became the main support of the family. Now, her growing career did not only mean fame, it was also the source of livelihood for the relatives who depended on her. Yet at the very moment when her career was gaining strong momentum, everything changed on June 26, 1967. At around 4:30 in the morning, Maggie de la Riva was driving home after a filming session at the ABS studio on Roxas Boulevard in Pasay City. With her was Helen Calderon, her maid, seated in the front passenger seat. As they neared Maggie's home in New Manila, a 2-door Pontiac convertible carrying 4 men suddenly sped toward them, pulled alongside, and nearly slammed into her car. To avoid a direct collision, Maggie hit the brakes, then accelerated and swerved left as her car reached the gate of her house. But the Pontiac accelerated again, and the 2 vehicles nearly collided a second time. That was enough to make Maggie angry, but within seconds, that irritation quickly turned into fear. The driver of the Pontiac stopped his car, jumped out, and rushed straight toward her. Terrified, Maggie leaned on the horn again and again. The man did not stop. He opened her car door, grabbed her left arm, and tried to pull her out. Maggie clung tightly to the steering wheel, while Helen Calderon also began shouting for help. Seeing her employer being dragged from the car, Helen immediately jumped out and grabbed Maggie's other arm, trying to pull her back, but the two women could not overcome the man's strength. As Maggie was dragged toward the Pontiac, the three other men inside immediately joined in. One grabbed her by the neck, while the other two restrained her arms and legs. All four men pulled her into the car, then sped off toward Broadway, leaving Helen behind. Inside the car, Maggie repeatedly begged to be released, but all she got in return were taunts, insults, and threats. The group told her that if she did not stay quiet, they would kill her with a gun and use acid to destroy her face. Meanwhile, the two men sitting on either side of her began molesting her. Maggie resisted and kept pleading, telling them that she was the only support for her family and that her mother was alone at home after her father's death. But those words did not make them hesitate. On the contrary, when they learned that her father had died, they made cruel remarks, saying that meant no one would be left to take revenge on them. By that point, Maggie understood that pleading was useless. She made the sign of the cross and began to pray. That only made the abductors angrier. They continued cursing and threatening her. When the car reached the Makati area, one of them took a handkerchief and blindfolded Maggie. She was again warned not to scream, or she would be stabbed or shot. So not long after, the car stopped in front of the swanky hotel in Pasay. Still blindfolded, she was led into a room on the second floor. Inside that room, Maggie was forced to sit on the bed. When the blindfold was removed, she saw all four men standing around her. They forced her to dance naked in front of them. Maggie reluctantly complied in despair, but after only a short time, the group lost patience. They sexually assaulted her. Afterward, the four men put Maggie's clothes back on and took her to an alley near the old Philippines Free Press building in Quiapo. Before letting her out, they warned her not to go to the police. They told her that all they had to do was post bail to get out, and then they would come back and hunt her down. They repeated their threat to use acid to ruin her face. After that, the group flagged down a little-known taxi and told the driver to take Maggie home. After being taken home by taxi, Maggie de la Riva was still in a state of panic. According to the driver's later testimony, throughout the ride back, she kept looking over her shoulder and asking whether any car was following them. That fear did not end once she got home. The threats left behind by the abductors, from coming back to hunt her down to using acid to destroy her face, made the ordeal not just a single night of violence, but a lingering trauma that continued afterward. After recovering, Maggie and her family decided to bring the case before the law. It was not an easy decision. At that time, for a woman to publicly accuse someone of rape meant facing not only the investigation and trial process, but also public scrutiny, suspicion, and the risk of having her personal honor dragged into open examination. But Maggie did not stay silent. She filed a complaint with the Court of First Instance of Quezon City, formally setting in motion a criminal case that would shock the entire Philippines. The investigation quickly focused on four men alleged to have taken part in the abduction and rape: Jaime Gomez Jose, Edgardo Payumo Aquino, Basilio Pineda Jr., and Rogelio Sevilla Cañal. What made the case explode almost immediately was who they were. All four came from wealthy and influential families. Jaime Jose, 21, was the son of a well-known doctor from Pampanga and a businesswoman, had studied engineering at De La Salle University and was the leader of a band. Edgardo Aquino was a journalism student and the son of a lawyer. Basilio Pineda Jr. was the son of a former police chief of Makati and Pasay. Sir Rogelio Cañal was an architecture student and the son of a former school principal. From the very beginning, the case was no longer just about 4 suspects. It became a test of whether the justice system could fully pursue a case involving men from privileged backgrounds. Jaime José was the first to be arrested. He was apprehended near his home while walking along Buendia Avenue in an operation where police officers posed as ice cream vendors to get close to him. When Maggie heard that José had been arrested, she immediately went to police headquarters to confirm his identity. When José saw Maggie, he stood up and said, Maggie, please, it wasn't me. Tell the truth." Maggie only stared at him, then sat down and cried. A moment later, she stood up and tried to scratch José's face, but he managed to dodge her. In humiliation, Maggie stood up and said, "You are one of the men who molested and raped me." José's face turned pale, and he could only turn toward the wall and cry. At around 9 o'clock that same night, José gave a statement admitting involvement in the crime and also named his 3 accomplices. José also said that Pineda was the only one who had planned it. According to Jaime José's initial statement to the police, some of the men in the group went to his house that night to borrow his red Pontiac convertible. José said he agreed only if he could come along. The group then went to a nightclub where they met Basilio Pineda Jr., who spoke about his love for Maggie de la Riva and said that he knew she had a filming session at ABS. Based on that statement, investigators believed the crime was not spontaneous, but showed signs of prior surveillance and a deliberate effort to follow the victim. After learning that José had been arrested, Pineda, Cañal, and Aquino fled in fear to Batangas. They used false names, ate dinner at a restaurant, and stayed at a lodge. The group later moved to another place where Cañal and Pineda were arrested, while Aquino escaped to Taal before surrendering after several days in hiding. During the confrontation at Quezon City Police Headquarters, Maggie identified Aquino as one of the men who had abducted and raped her. She also identified Pineda as the man who blindfolded and assaulted her in the car, and Cañal as the one who carried her from the car into the motel. According to Maggie's testimony, all 4 took turns sexually assaulting her. When the case went to trial, the defendants did not stick to a single explanation. Instead of admitting what they had done and asking for leniency, the defense chose another strategy: to completely change the nature of what had happened. They claimed it began with a traffic incident, then turned into an act of revenge, rather than a planned abduction. At the same time, they also tried to deny the element of force, constructing the story that Maggie had gone with them voluntarily, and that what followed was really some kind of transactional encounter. One of the arguments they raised was that Maggie had agreed to perform a striptease for 1,000 pesos, or that they had removed their clothes only because the weather was too hot. In other words, the defense strategy was not simply to deny guilt. They also tried to push suspicion back onto the victim, turning an abduction and rape into an ambiguous story about consent. The court did not accept that explanation. In the court's view, there was nothing in Maggie's circumstances to suggest that she would have voluntarily entered into such an arrangement. At the time, she was at the height of her career in film and modeling. The court also found the defendant's description of the payment arrangement illogical. According to their version, Maggie was given 100 pesos up front and would only receive the remaining 900 pesos afterward. To the court, that was difficult to believe if this had really been just a performance, as the defense tried to portray it. The argument that they had removed their clothes simply because the weather was too hot was also found unconvincing. But the court did not reject the defense only because it sounded implausible. More importantly, Maggie's testimony was supported by other elements in the case record. The medical examination results were consistent with her account that she had been sexually assaulted and directly contradicted the story the defendants tried to construct. In addition, the entire sequence of events, from approaching the victim outside her home, forcing her out of her car, taking her to another place, and threatening her after releasing her, showed nothing that suggested a voluntary encounter. Meanwhile, the defendants' accounts were contradictory, illogical, and unable to adequately explain the chain of events that had unfolded that night. The lawyers for Jose, Aquino, and Cañal also tried to separate their clients from the rape itself, by arguing that perhaps only Pineda had harmed Maggie, while the others waited outside in the car. They even implied that some of Maggie's bruises might have been self-inflicted. The court did not accept that argument. In the court's view, it was very difficult to believe that a victim would fabricate a story about being sexually assaulted while knowing that her own honor and her family's honor would also be dragged into a public ordeal. In the end, the court found Maggie's testimony more credible because it was consistent with the medical evidence and with the overall circumstances of the case, while the story offered by the defendants could not stand. From that, the court determined that this was not a voluntary meeting, but a forcible abduction that led to sexual assault. That the trial lasted for years and was eventually elevated to the Supreme Court. Before the final ruling was issued, one of the four defendants, Rogelio Cañal, died in prison on December 28, 1970. Then, in February 1971, the Supreme Court handed down its ruling on the three remaining defendants, Jose, Pineda, and Aquino. They were convicted of forcible abduction with sexual assault, along with other charges related to the case. Under the ruling, each man received 4 death sentences and was also ordered to pay a fine of 40,000 pesos. At that time, death by electric chair was still in effect in the Philippines. According to some accounts repeated later, in a radio interview before the execution, all 3 men broke down crying without stopping. On May 17, 1972, the death sentence was carried out on the 3 convicted men. The Maggie de la Riva case later became one of the most controversial and widely discussed cases in the Philippines, not only because of the severity and brazenness of the crime, but also because of Maggie's determination to pursue justice to the very end. Despite threats to her life and the damage to her reputation, she still forced the men who harmed her to answer before the law. Years later, when the death penalty was abolished in 2006, Maggie was one of its strongest opponents. She continued to support restoring the death penalty for crimes she considered especially brutal.